Hey, what's going on, everybody? Happy Sunday. Hope you're all doing great. Happy time zone wherever you are. Today, we are joined with a special guest. We have Salman Shah with us, all the way from Bangalore, India, hanging out with us today. Salman currently works at Microsoft on the Azure team, building out Azure SQL, and really excited to kind of hear about your journey into tech and so on. Really appreciate your time. I know it's really, really late over there in India, so I really appreciate that you're willing to spend some time with us. We'll have about 40, 45 minutes or so with Salman. I'll keep streaming after that. But Salman, thank you for spending some time. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background. What got you interested in working in the tech industry and getting into programming and databases and stuff like that?
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Um, so I think you asked me a bunch of questions. I'm going to answer one by one, all of them one
Sure.
by one. So I think I graduated with a bachelor's in computer science way back in 2019. I've worked in the industry for about 3 years now. It's not been fairly long. I initially started off. When I was initially in college, when I was trying to pick a major, my younger brother had done some sort of programming, so that's what initially got me interested into the whole world of programming. I looked it up. I did struggle a lot, including when I was in college. There were days when I would just not get stuff, and I just try to run into roadblocks. Still happens. I don't think things have changed much. Still, I'm working on a bug currently where I'm just stuck, and that keeps happening, right? And that's computer science. It's fairly frustrating, even when you're working on, especially when you're working on prod life solutions. So yeah, I think that's where I started programming in college. We had a bunch of societies and clubs in college which promoted programming. I think I learned a lot through them. I met a wonderful set of people, some who guided me, some who I mentored, and that's how programming happened in college. When I was getting out of college, I moved to a company called Myntra. So that was my first job right out of college. It was an e-commerce, I wouldn't say startup, but a company which had just been acquired by Walmart and was doing pretty well. Yeah, so I joined there. I was there for about 2 years. I worked on a team called API Platforms at Myntra. Uh, we usually used to work with Golang and GraphQL. I was there, and that was a good job. I think I had a lot of fun. But then I started looking at other places as well. I think in 2021, I started applying, and that's when I got my offer from Microsoft. That's a fairly interesting story as well. But I think my just to answer your question about Microsoft very specifically. So my introduction to my manager at that point at Microsoft was very coincidental. A friend of mine who had gone to the US to apply for masters had applied to a job at Microsoft, had rejected it, and then they asked him, do you have someone whom you can recommend for a job? And he recommended my name, and that's
That's
how I
great.
got the initial interview. So that I had a conversation with the hiring manager, and then he referred me, because my friend ended up rejecting Microsoft and he ended up going to Google.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I think that's how I got my foot in the door at Microsoft, and this was a friend who was from college, who I interacted with a lot again through club societies. So this goes on. Just I mean, the moral of the story, and I'm not trying to drag this too much, is
No, not at all.
networking is never bad, right? And no matter, you never know what works at what point. This was very random, very coincidental, but it worked out, and it gave me the initial push. Obviously, I had to do interviews and a bunch of stuff later, but it did give that initial push to work at a team like Azure SQL, where I am at the moment.
Well, it's a fantastic friend that's willing to pass on a referral like that. Some companies will actually ask if you say, "Hey, I'm not going to take the job offer." They might ask you, like, "Do you know of anybody?" But you can also sort of preempt that conversation and say, "Hey, I'm not going to take the role, but I do know somebody else if you're still interviewing." I do know someone else that would be interested in the role. I often give that feedback to students where they get more than one offer and say like, how do I turn down an offer? It's like, well, turn it down, but like refer some of your friends if they're still willing to interview and say, I've got other friends with the same skills as me coming from the same school. Would you be willing to interview them? A lot of companies are going to be open to that as long as they're, you know, if they see you get through the interview process and they trust your level of skill, then it'll be like, well, clearly that school is training you the right way. So they might be more willing to hear about that. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, so if you do exclamation point guest in Twitch, and I'll put all these links in the YouTube description afterwards. So like, subscribe, give us some feedback, let us know what you think of the show. That you also did the Google Summer of Code. I'm always curious, like what that process is like. Were you doing that while you were still in school, or was that after school, like before the Myntra job? Like, how did that sort of play into the journey as well?
Yeah. So that was before the Myntra job. That was at the end of my third year, so pre-final year, and that's that's another interesting story. So I was free for the summer between my third year and my final year, and I had landed an internship at Goldman Sachs. Okay,
Okay.
and Goldman Sachs was paying very well. Was almost paying what Myntra paid me for those 2 months on a
Wow.
per month basis. Was paying me almost what Myntra was going to pay me as well, right? So they were giving interns almost as much as what an full time employee would get at any other company, right?
Wow.
Top of the market. And yeah, so Goldman Sachs was very tempting. I landed, so essentially the process for Google Summer of Code, how it typically works. And I am going to touch on that and then I'll come back to the Goldman Sachs story. But when I was applying for Google Summer of Code in that year, I'd already gotten my Goldman Sachs internship. So yeah, so Google Summer of Code, the process is fairly simple. They've changed it a bit now, but the whole and now it's so earlier it was just open to students. Now it's just open to anyone who wants to contribute to open source. So that's a big plus. So the typical process is you look out for an open source org. Typically, you would try to look for an org which has already been there in the previous Google Summer of Codes and the previous editions of Google Summer of Code, and you would typically start contributing to them. So I started contributing to an organization called Internet Archive. Internet Archive has a project called Open Library where they're trying to democratize information about books because this often becomes, just lost literature. So they're trying to put them on the internet so as for them to be conserved forever and live on the internet. So Open Library had so I started working with Open Library. It had a very interesting project that was going on, still is going on. I haven't been able to contribute in recent years, but yeah. So I started off with that. I just made initially a few pull requests. I started attending They had a Tuesday community sync up, which was again fairly late in the night, but I tried to attend as much as possible when I was there. And then I just asked them, are you guys applying to Google Summer of Code? I'm very interested to apply as a Google Summer of Code student. And the project maintainer at that point said, you know what, we're going to have the org is going to apply, which means Internet Archive is going to apply, and the project will be part of the org. So that was really nice. Yeah, and I got to sort of work with a bunch of very exciting, interesting people. My mentor was based in the US, in California, if I remember correctly. I was working out of India. So the proposal, after that, you have to write like a detailed proposal. There's a format that's sort of available, which you can use to detail out your proposal. You can send it to your mentor, you can send it to other people whom you know, who can then review your proposal, give you suggestions. You essentially need to give a timeline as to what all are you going to do in those two. I believe it was for 3 months, if I remember correctly. There's a stipend paid out to you based on the country that you're in. So it depends. It varies from country to country. It's based on your purchasing power parity. And once you submit your uh, proposal, The org decides whether they want to take in, and it's limited by the number of proposals they can, or the number of projects they can
Right.
get based on what Google Summer of Code has assigned to them. And then you get in. And so my proposal came in. I remember I was at a restaurant eating, and I was trying to refresh the page constantly, and finally it came in, and I was selected. Yeah, and then I didn't want to do multiple things at the same time, so it was very hard turning down Goldman Sachs. They were a bit persistent, but I explained to them, what, I'm passionate about doing this. I think this is something that I feel could. It was something which, no one had to wake me up in the morning to do. Right? I really wanted to do it.
Yeah, that's
So
good.
I think it was hard to turn them down, but I eventually did. And yeah, and then I worked on Google Summer of Code, and that was a lot of fun. Uh,
That's awesome.
so yeah, that's the Google Summer of Code story.
Do you think that Google Summer of Code helped you get that first job at Myntra? Like once you finished
Absolutely.
school?
Absolutely did,
Okay.
because I remember that was my entry point as well. Because so how it worked at Myntra was, you had to write a coding test, which they typically give you. There would be about 2-3 DSA questions. That doesn't, yeah, I mean, that is something that you have to do. But once you get in, right? If I had about 3 rounds of interview. First was a recent engineer who was coincidentally a college senior of mine. The second interview was a fairly mid-level tech lead person, and the third one was VP of engineering. All
Mhm.
three of them looked at Google Summer of Code, asked me questions about it, and
Wow.
were fairly very interested to talk about more than Google Summer of Code. I think people are very these days. People are very interested if you're working on some open source project that's out there, especially large open source projects, because all of these companies have large code bases where they expect employees to get in and understand,
That's
and
true.
sort of find their way through things. And when you're already doing that through open source, you've
Mhm.
already done stage one, which is fighting that intimidation and trying to figure out what is your work, and get through the code base. I think a lot of engineers take a lot of time, especially when they're new to the job, just trying to adjust and just trying to ramp up. When you've done open source, especially when you're out of college, when you've done open source, you know that process, you know that grind. It's fairly easy to get in and figure things out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think so. They were that was the subject of my conversation across all three interviews.
Right.
I got in pretty quickly, and yeah, I think that does play a role. There's no denying that.
For sure, for sure. How do you think a typical person could get involved in like a big open source project like that? Because like Google Summer of Code only runs in the summer, obviously. It's why they call it Summer of Code. But where can people like do you know of any off the top of your head? Like I'm thinking like Hacktober and the there's usually one in December. It's like every like the first 25 days of December or something. There's like a code every day kind of thing and contribute to open source. Like, do you know of any like really large places like where people can go and find these big open source projects to try to contribute to? Um, one thing that I've seen with students is it's not always easy to go like to get started in really large open source packages because a lot of the and issues and things that get raised by the users of that software are very complex things that are feature requests and things like that that somebody fairly new to tech is not going to be able to tackle. Do you know of any resources that are like, hey, this is like a good place to get started with, like beginner level, like this is a good first issue kind of thing that we sometimes hear about? Do you know of anything like that where people can get involved?
So I think the biggest part in getting started with open source is learning how to talk to the community, right?
Okay.
Uh, every community is fairly receptive of new people trying to join. One, two, every major open source project that I've at least looked at has issues marked as good first issue, beginner level issue, which they usually triage and keep for sort of beginners to start, or documentation related issues which people can look at and just get some confidence in trying to set up the project and solving it out. So I think that's a good starting point. Other than that, I think so. The bigger the org, the more organized they are often are. So if you look at, for example, Mozilla, or any of these bigger orgs, Red Hat as well. And so these orgs are fairly very organized. They are very intimidating as well. I
Mhm.
remember I initially tried to contribute to Mozilla, got very intimidated, dropped it off, went off to Open Library. They had a Python project which sort of worked with my skill set as well. So it is definitely intimidating. I think the real battle is you trying to take that first step. I think
Mhm.
once you overcome that, I think it's not very difficult to contribute to open source projects. Not very difficult to understand what to do and all of that. The harder part is the communication that you build. I think that's one. Two is I think that's something that's very important because I've realized this skill, especially the skill of cold emailing, and a lot of students later realize this, especially the ones who've done Google Summer of Code. Later, when you're cold emailing for jobs, or you're trying to land interviews, or you're trying to talk to people just to get a referral or anything of that sort, these skills come in very handy, right? When you've learned how to communicate to absolute strangers in a very different part of the world, I think it's fairly easier. So a lot of these skills are transferable, that that happen in your open source journey uh, to into the real tech industry world. And yeah, I mean, I hope people can use that. Coming to your question about Google Summer of Code being in the summer and fairly limited, I think there are two parts to this. One is, I would say, do not do Google Summer of Code for the purpose of Google Summer of Code. Do it because you want to contribute to open source and maybe stay there for some time, if not for a very long time. Second, there are other programs. I know Mozilla runs an open source program. There's something called as Outreachy, which is a fairly large open source program. I think Red Hat, I think Linux also runs a couple of open source programs. The Linux Foundation. So there are a lot of, and I know a couple of college juniors of mine who've enrolled or who've been a part of this. GitHub runs a program which I forget the name. GitHub, I do remember even Facebook participates in the React project. The React Foundation participates in that program. So there are a bunch of programs across various timelines, especially cohort-based programs where you can contribute to open source. So it's not just Google Summer of Code. I think back then, at least my awareness was lesser, but there are a lot of open source projects and a lot of big tech companies trying to push open source and get that out of the market, just to democratize contributions across the spectrum.
Right.
So I think there is a lot of then there is a lot of opportunities if you and all you have to do is just ask for them. I think if you are able to get that fear over, I think you should be great.
Awesome. We had a question come in from Juggling Biohazard. It says, I recently got contacted by an Amazon recruiter and have a code challenge in 2 weeks. I'm trying to cram for data structures and algorithms, but I don't think it's enough time realistically. How long would you say it takes roughly to get comfortable with DSA? I've been doing this for 26 years and I still get nervous about those. Um, how much time do you think is a reasonable amount of time to prepare for like a FANG level interview like that?
So I think Amazon is fairly different, and I've given Amazon interviews as well, right? Amazon interviews are usually two parts, and I'll try to answer the question very specific to what he's asked, and I'll try to elaborate more with respect to the FANG in general as well. So Amazon has two parts to most of their interviews. One is the whole leadership principles part of it, and if you don't have an idea on that, please do look it up. And I'll just give a simple example. So most leadership principles questions typically starts with, for example, one of the questions I was once asked was, let's say you are in a situation where you and your teammate disagree on the approach to a problem. How would you go about? So they're trying to look at how you would approach real life problems as well, and this is a very important part of the interview, and a lot of people neglect this part of the interview. Okay, so that's one. That's a very side note to what has been asked. Coming to data structures and algorithms, I think it's very important to sort of understand what to do and how to do. Okay, so there are two parts to DSA preparation, according to me, right? One is trying to just get the theoretical part of it, right? The second is trying to be smart about it. Okay, if Amazon is giving you a coding test, typically most coding tests, assuming they have most coding tests have around 3 questions. 90 to 95% of the people, and this is not, don't quote me on the stat, but most people get 2 out of the 3 questions. Okay, so the first question is normally either a linked list question or a stack question or some string question that's manipulated or some array question. These are the topics that around which is typically a easy question on most of these coding platforms. Then there's a medium level question, which is around a slightly more tougher data structure like trees, or all those different type of trees that you have, binary search tree, and
A lot of traversal algorithms probably for that second one, like
traversal
depth first search or
algorithms
breadth
are
first search. Yeah.
Yes. And the third one is essentially either a graph problem, so you'll have some island problem where you're doing that, or it will be a DP problem, right? So the smart thing to do, if you feel you're very short on time, is to ensure you can solve those first 2 questions and those particular topics, and be as strong as possible. Try to solve medium level questions on most of these platforms, especially around these topics. If you've done that, you're great. Don't go to trying to solve hard level problems, spending 2 3 days on one problem. That's not required. Interview preparation is all about being smart about your approach and trying to solve things. Yeah, so I think that's probably my
Mm.
advice. If you do have time, do look at DP. I think dynamic programming is fairly important. Do try
So
to look at.
So
Yep.
Amazon actually announced last summer that they don't do DP problems anymore, and then Facebook followed up in the fall that they're not asking dynamic programming problems anymore either.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I've interviewed with Amazon fairly recently, and yes, you're right about that. They've not asked DP problems. I don't think I did DP as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was not even asked any graph algorithm questions as well. Fairly around trees, or linked lists, or some sorting algorithm. Around
Hmm.
those is what I was asked at least.
FANG
Um,
companies really like their traversal algorithms. So I would say depth first
yeah.
search, breadth first search, binary search, and then like heap problems, and then like the array problems of like 2 by 2 grid, 2 pointer problems,
Heap is super
sliding window
important.
problems. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, heap and trees is super important. So all my questions in my Microsoft interview, which I landed for Azure SQL, all of them were trees. Literally all the interviews were trees.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah, so I think trees is a fairly important concept, and cover everything in trees. And don't try to find some random problem that someone has asked. A lot of people make this mistake of finding some new concept. Suddenly you're starting to look at tries or anything that's which is very vague, which someone has asked once in a while. Don't try to get there, especially when you're short on time. Just try to focus on what's been the core of things, and I think you should be able to get through.
Yeah. Awesome. Sethi also mentioned in chat, I just completed the interview cake full course in 3 weeks. I'm feeling confident about most of the data structures algorithm I'm kind of summarizing here. Not feeling confident in dynamic programming, binary search, and graph questions. How should I also approach and change my prep nowadays? I would say like that prep is good. If there are certain algorithms that you know you're not comfortable with, then I would focus on those, but don't do that at the expense of not practicing the others. Like you don't want to say like for the next month all I'm going to do is like DP and graph because I'm not good at those, because then if you go to an interview in a month and they ask you like a depth first search problem and you haven't studied that one, you're like, oh shoot, how do I do that one again? So you still want like a regular schedule. I posted a link over in chat for some videos that I made on YouTube about doing the leak code grind a little bit smarter, where you come up with a schedule of like, this is where I'm going to like regularly and routinely work through these different algorithms. But I would say add in the algorithms that you know that you're not as good at. And then the second video that I link there is about how do you reverse engineer other people's answers to come up with those high level strategies of just how do I do a depth first search? How do I do a sliding window problem? Like, what are ways that other people kind of approach those kinds of algorithms, and study the strategies? Because Salman's right. Like, it's not about memorizing the particular answer to one question, because you're not going to get that question in a real interview. I mean, if you do, you're lucky, but it also means that interviewer is lazy. and they're just like pulling some leak code problem off the internet. But I would say don't focus so much on memorizing the exact syntax and just have the strategy ready to go. And I typically tell people like put it on a little sticky note, put it around the edge of your monitor of like this is how to do DP, this is how to do sliding windows, this is how to do heap problems, or like a min heap and a max heap problem because they're slightly different. And put those on sticky notes around your screen so that when you read a prompt and your brain goes, oh, that sounds like a sliding window problem, you can kind of look at that post-it note and go, okay, well, this is what I need to do for, just from a general strategy point of view, this is how I do sliding window. And I think that you'll get a good portion of the way through that problem just by having the strategies ready to go.
Yeah, I think just one last point to add that I have. Be Ensure you're doing mock interviews. I think
For sure.
doing mock interviews is one of the best things you can do for your preparation. Just find a friend, ask them to ask you a question. If they're working at any company for that matter, you don't really need someone who's working at Frank. Just ask anyone you know who's in the industry, get them to select a question, go through the whole routine. So for example, if you do Google interviews, for example, Google expects you to do at least, I think if I remember correctly, two medium questions or one hard question in like a 45-minute duration. uh, do that time period, and ensure you're not using your coding editor, you're using a Google Doc, or Google uses a Google Code Studio or something of that sort. I remember they had sent me a link where I could sort of type out the question, but it's an editor with no special features, so as to say. So do things in those, try to simulate the real environment as much as possible. Write code, because that's what they expect you to. They don't expect the code to run, but they do expect code to be written.
Hmm.
It's okay if you miss a semicolon here or there if you're using,
Right.
for example, C++. It's okay with some syntactic mistakes, but try to go through the entire process. uh, and a mock interview gives you a lot of confidence. If Even if you're not very confident, I've done some questions, I've not done some questions. You can't do all the questions in the world, but one thing you can't replace is your confidence. And if you have the confidence and if you have the right approach, one of the important things to also learn is most of these companies don't look for most, and not all, but most of these companies don't, and this is especially Microsoft. They don't look for the right answer, they look for the right approach. And
Yep.
if your
That's right.
approach is right, and even if you're close to the answer and you haven't got it, it's okay. And I have had that one interview at Microsoft where I couldn't reach till the answer. I was almost there, and then we'd run out of time, and they told me, you were almost there. One step later, you would have been there. But try to stick to that. And I think if you're doing mock interviews, you should be really confident about it. So all of you who are interviewing, please do that, and I think that'll be great.
Awesome.
And that's all.
Cool. So Sethi, I dropped a bunch of links in chat. So interviewing.io is a good platform, but it's a paid platform. They will defer the payment that you make them if you say like, hey, I can't afford the interviews, but I've got interviews coming up. They'll ask you to pay them back once you get a job. You can also go to sites like Pramp, but you don't necessarily know who you're going to get paired up with on Pramp. And I think the biggest thing, like I agree, absolutely do mock interviews. Like you have to actually practice with somebody, but it has to be with somebody who knows a little bit more than you do, that you can get good feedback from them. Like I could go do a mock interview with my dog. My dog's not going to give me any feedback, right? I could go do a mock interview with my mom, and my mom's like, yeah, I guess that sounds smart. I don't know. You have to be able to get good feedback from somebody. That's the only way that you're going to improve. If you do a mock interview with somebody who's kind of at the same level as you, they're going to say, okay, well, that worked. Good job. High five. But it may not be the best algorithm. It may not, like, they may not be able to point out optimizations in the code where someone who's more at a mentor level to you could actually say like, hey, this algorithm works. Here's how you can make it better, just to teach you those finer points around things like, really big companies, FANG companies, they care about memory use and call stack use. And so finding places where you can say, okay, I need to reduce how many different functions I call, or I need to find a way of doing something in a more optimal way. Like I used to give a coding challenge to my students that said, okay, you've got an array of numbers. I want to find the biggest number in the list. I want to find the smallest number in the list. And I want to find the average number in the list. And they're like, okay, well, I'll do like a dot min, or I'll do a dot max, and then I'll like figure out how to do an average. but they're passing over that data over and over and over and over to do all that. And so my challenge then is like, okay, do that only passing over the data one time. And that it made them think about, well, how does .min and .max actually work? How do I actually like go pass over the data one time, keep track of my own minimum, keep track of my own maximum, keep track of my own sum, so that at the end, plus a count, I can do my own average, only passing over that data one time. So doing a mock interview, absolutely, I agree with that advice. But make sure you're doing it with somebody that can give you feedback on how to do it better. That's the way that you're going to improve and learn how you're going to stand out on those things. So if you can afford it, Interviewing.io is a great platform, and I say that because I'm a paid interviewer on their platform. I actually do interviews for them, but they will defer the cost of interviews. So if you can't afford it, you can just reach out to the support team and say, hey, I'm a student, I can't afford this right now, can I get a couple of interviews and do the deferral program? They'll absolutely help you out with that.
I think
We had
just one thing to add
Go
over
ahead.
there, right? Please do absolutely read about time complexity, space complexity. Every time you solve a problem, even though if it's on a coding platform, uh, try to find what is the time complexity or space complexity of your algorithm, of the data structures that you've used. All FANG companies I've interviewed at definitely ask that question right after you finished coding, right? uh, Before you even know if it's correct, they'll ask you what is the time complexity, what is the space complexity, can you optimize this depending on what you've done.
Yep.
So yeah, definitely do please absolutely look at that. Also, one of the other things that are there is try to ensure you write your code in a fairly structured manner, uh, while naming variables and those smaller things aren't important. People do care about how you've written code. Don't be very haphazard about it. Uh, and I think there are a bunch of online links on what all are the things that you could potentially do. Yeah, I think that's something. Code quality is something that's highly appreciated, especially at FANG, because these are huge code bases with some of the products, like for example SQL Server is like a 30-40 year old product. So these are people have written code, you will be looking at code, so they're fairly large documented standards. Like we have a coding document guide or a code standards document which is I don't know, fairly long, about 20-30 pages long. So all of these FANG companies have standards. You can look up anyone can look up Google's C++ guide to writing code. It's available online for
Mm-hmm.
free, you can just download it. So try to maintain these standards. Yep.
Yep. Awesome. So we have Salman for about 10 more minutes. So if you've got other questions like that, absolutely keep dropping those in chat. Sethi is asking, like, how do I get that first job in tech? Currently living in Canada, not a lot of companies are looking for entry-level roles. Finding like your first job in tech is going to be hard no matter where you live. We're seeing it in the United States. We're seeing it in Canada, every other country, though. Finding that first job in tech is hard. It really comes down to how are you communicating the value that you bring. They're going to see from your resume, they're going to see from your education background that you're new in the industry. And so you really have to position like, this is what I bring to the team, and don't make it sound like I've got all these things to learn. I think having good projects that stand out to the company, and I've said this quite a lot on the stream recently, but the 3 projects that stand out on a resume to me are a project that is kind of aligned with what my company does. So if there's a particular company that you're targeting, or a particular industry that you're targeting, build a project around that thing and make that really prominent on your resume. The second one is show me a project that shows me that you know the fundamentals of, if you're getting into web application development, for example, show me that you know about authentication, authorization, session management, database storage, form data, like kind of those fundamental building blocks. You don't have to be an expert at any of it, but knowing how, like, just say I've implemented auth, I've implemented OAuth, I've done a little bit of like CRUD, to store form data in a database and recall it again, like just some of the core fundamentals of what it means to be a web developer. Or if you're doing API development, like what makes a good RESTful API or asynchronous API or gRPC API, like whatever kind of API you want to build, Or if you want to be a front end person, show me that you've got at least some idea about how to build out those front end components and some HTML and CSS, where maybe you're using a framework like Tailwind, but that you can also go in and customize some of those things and sort of override what's there. I think those kinds of things really stand out. And then the third project that I recommend is just something that you're really passionate about, something that you're really interested in. I like to see those as three things. First and foremost, I want to see that you know how to use the technologies that my company uses. I think that that's a better way into the company than say, well, I know Python really well, but if I'm not hiring for a Python role, then your Python project may not be, necessarily close to what my company does. Like if we're a JavaScript only kind of company doing something in Python, it's like, okay, well, it kind of counts, but that's going to be more like system level programming or back end level programming. And maybe I need like more full stack. So I need to see that you can also do front end work if I'm going to even consider you for that role. So showing that you can kind of that you've got some sort of project that aligns with either the technologies that we use or that aligns with what our company actually does. Because when I hire somebody, I want to know that I'm hiring somebody for more than just their technical skill. I want to know that you care about what we do as a company, that you care about who our customers are, that you care about the industry that we're in. Like, show me something that shows that passion as well. Even if you don't actually care about it, it still shows, like, it makes me think that you do. And I think that those kinds of things will stand out a little bit more. From there, then it's up to you to get through the interview. But I think that that's a better way of like getting noticed and having a company sort of start that process of reaching out and starting the interview.
Yeah, just to add to that, once you do these projects, please do put them on GitHub or
Yeah,
any
absolutely.
open source platform that you believe in. I think having a link to just the code of what you've done is very valuable to any recruiter, hiring manager. I don't know about recruiter, but at least hiring managers. So that tells us that you've actually done it and you've put the work on it, and it's okay if it's messy, but it's out there, and that creates much more value than you just claiming something on your resume. So yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Juggling Biohazards followed up and said, cracking the coding interview book is written in Java. Are there other languages that interviews prefer? It does depend on the company a little bit. They may want you to interview in whatever technology they use, but I think most recruiters are going to be okay with you coming in and just using whatever you're most comfortable in. Most interviewers are going to be able to read and understand whatever language you're actually writing in. High-level languages are obviously going to be a lot less code than writing in like Java or C++, where you're going to have to write a lot of code. And so I would generally recommend, like, if you can do the interview in a high level language, it's just you'll get through the problems a lot faster because you're not writing so much code. Like the same algorithm I could write in 10 lines of Python code might take me 50 lines in Java. Maybe not, but like I've seen some where like Java's a lot more code to actually write, and that takes more time. And so, like Salman was saying, if they're going to give you 2 or 3 problems that you have to get through in an hour, you need to find a way to write those things quickly, and higher level languages are going to help you there. So if you know JavaScript or Python or Ruby or C# or something like that, where it's a high level language, I think you'll get through those interviews a little bit faster as far as actually coding it up. You still have to go through the same problem solving process of how do I actually break the problem down and actually solve the problem. But I think that you'll have less code overall to write if you use a high level language.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, so if you're not comfortable using Java, for example, I don't know if that's the intent of your question, but if you are not, GitHub has a lot of for example, cracking the coding interview, right? A lot of these books, the C++ version of it, you can find it on GitHub, and I've pointed a link. I'm sure there are other languages you can find the one. All you just need to do is just search cracking the coding interview. What I searched was cracking the coding interview C++, and this is the first link that came up.
Cool.
So you can similarly find other such open source GitHub pages or repos very specifically detailing, and if you want to align your preparation along that language. Apart from that, I completely agree with everything that was said. Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Salman, I know that you need to leave soon. So if folks have any last questions for Salman, get them in now, because Salman's got to go. It's like really, really late for him over there in Bangalore right now in India. So again, Salman, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for sharing your journey into tech. I'm a little bit curious. So, you went through computer science and was learning programming. Your first, the Google Summer of Code was coding. Your first job was coding. How did you end up getting into like building up the database and dealing with database storage and like the really low level side of things at Microsoft?
I think, I mean, it was a I mean, all of these opportunities, I think they're a combination of, there is a certain amount of luck involved, right? So what happened back then was Microsoft was opening a sister team in India at their India Development Center. My hiring manager was, looking for engineers who could fit, and he didn't typically have a very hard requirement on, the younger lot of software engineers having experience with respect to database internals.
Mhm.
So I think that, and my friend rejecting a job at Google and suggesting my name. So it was there was a lot of luck involved. There's no denying that. Uh, so I think that, and just my interview preparation being up to the mark. I was fairly well prepared because I was still interviewing at a lot of places. This came in very randomly, and I said yes to it, and that's how things worked out. So I think, a lot of people I've talked to, just networking opens up a lot of these opportunities. Like I said, right, a lot of it was luck. But if you need luck to smile on you, you need to be. For example, in my case, I had networked well. I was prepared with respect to interviews. So my interviews finished in about 2.5 weeks. The result took another week, and 3.5 weeks later, I had a job in my hand. Right from when I initially communicated to them. I had an initial call with the hiring manager where I was just trying to understand if that's what I really want to do, and he
Awesome.
went through the motions. So yeah, I think, I think a lot, like I said, right, a lot of luck will smile on you if you're well prepared and you're doing everything right. But at the end of the day, if things are not working, wait for it. It will eventually come in. It took me 2 years to get to Microsoft. I've been wanting to go there since a very long time. So
Yeah.
it does take time at times, but eventually it does come in.
Yep. It takes work and practice and preparation for sure. It's it can be luck, but a lot of it is going to come down to the preparation. Like you might get lucky getting the interview, but then you have to get through the interview. And so
Absolutely.
it's still going to take study and prep. There's no easy path into these companies, for sure. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of study, a lot of preparation, a lot of practice. But that's part of the unfortunate part of our interview process is the demonstration portion of you have to prove that you can do the job in order to get the job. But it's a necessary part of what we do because we don't necessarily know your level of skill until we actually watch you do something. It's not necessarily trust based on, oh, you went to this school, therefore we'll just hire you without seeing that you can actually do the job. But yeah, Salman, really appreciate your time today. Thank you for spending time with us. I know it's super
Thank you
late
so
over there.
much.
Thank you so much. I hope that we'll continue to chat. And I've already said I'm hoping to get over to Bangalore at some point in the next couple of months, and I'd love to
Would
meet
love
up
to
and have a
meet you.
coffee or something. So yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you so much. Appreciate your time today. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It was nice talking, and thank you. Please feel free to reach out on my LinkedIn, Twitter. I think my socials are already out there.
Yep.
Would love to help anyone who needs help. And this is good night for me. So thank you so much.
All right.
But I'm gonna. All right.
No
Bye
problem.
bye. Take care.
Cheers. Bye bye. All right. Well, really appreciate Salman's time today. Thank you everybody for the questions for Salman as well. I'm going to keep streaming for a little bit, so don't go away. I'll still be hanging out here. So if you've got continued questions, I'm happy to address those um, around like any sort of interview prep, career prep, anything along those lines. So hey, Fortran, appreciate the follow. Um, thanks for dropping by. I'm always curious how people find the stream, so feel free to let us know in the stream how you found out about the channel and so on. Yeah, what else is going on today? Who else has questions? Happy to address any of that. So we've been dropping tons and tons of links. I'll get all that in the YouTube description down below. So if you're watching this on YouTube later on, go check all the links down below and do me a favor and like and subscribe and all that good stuff too. How's everything going? Any new prints? Yeah, actually just finished this print for somebody else. So it's a spyglass. that I printed off, and it was from some TV show or a movie or something. I don't know. They actually sent me the model, and so I printed it up in a wood-based filament, and then I actually painted it to look like wood, because when you, I don't know how well you'll be able to tell, but like it's just this plain sort of light brown color, and it doesn't actually have wood grain in it. So everything here that looks like wood grain is just paint on the filament. And it's not glued together yet, but I'll be sending that off to them. And then these parts like move. There's like a little clickable thing inside, and then the end part here, which also is not yet glued on, actually opens up here. So this part would glue on or whatever, and there's like a cap or whatever on it. It's from some movie. I don't know what the movie was, but I don't know if anybody recognizes it. But yeah, someone asked me to print that for them, so finish that up this week. I've got a few ideas for the October giveaway. I've got like a flat little catapult kit, which is kind of fun. It prints really flat, and you basically put all the parts together, and it makes like a little, flingable like catapult kind of thing. Not that you can catapult anything super heavy, but it prints really thin, and it's about this big or so when it prints, and you take all the pieces apart and you assemble it. So I'm looking for something like that where I can get like one of those really stiff, like cardboard kind of envelopes, like a really flat kind of envelope, and send those out. The other thing that I'm thinking of doing for the October giveaway is saying, like, if you live in the United States, I'll ship it to you. If you live in any other country, then maybe for the giveaway, like, we'll do like a $5 PayPal card or something like that instead. Shipping got really expensive, shipping those dragons all over the world. I'm not gonna lie, I spent many hundreds of dollars shipping those things around the world, and so I'm probably not gonna do something of that nature again, like just for the size of the box and the weight. And I was domestically within the United States, I was paying like $6 to $10 per dragon. To go to Canada, it was $20 to $25. Over to Europe, they were like $40 to $50 each. And at one point, I actually put a whole bunch of them in a box and sent it to a coworker of mine who lives in Germany, and had him send them from Germany, which were only like a few dollars once they were already in Europe. It only costs a few dollars to mail it to various countries in Europe. So yeah, it just got really expensive. So I'm probably not going to do something of that size again. Weight-wise, it was okay, but to put something in a custom-sized box like that got really expensive. And so I'm thinking if I can just do like these flat, like really stiff cardboard kind of envelopes, I'm probably going to do something along those lines. But and so I'm thinking like just some sort of flat kit or something like that where you can take pieces apart. Let me pull up a few examples here and show you what I mean. Let me go over to this screen, and we'll go over to just the browser. And we'll hide that one. All right. So if we go look at printables.com and we look for like kit card. So this is the kind of thing I'm thinking is, like just something flat like this where it prints flat and you take all the pieces apart, and this makes like a little speeder from Star Wars, or little animals or dinosaurs or zombies or something along these lines. There's a lot of jets and stuff like that. This is the catapult one that I was talking about. So it prints flat like this, and you just take all the parts, like you cut all the little parts out of it and you assemble it. And these things are actually springs. So when you pull the thing down and release it, it actually flings things like an actual catapult. So this one was actually pretty fun to print. Like it prints really well. So yeah, that's the kind of thing. Or like these little BD-1 droids. There's lots of Star Wars and Star Trek kinds of models. And so what I'm thinking is I might do like, maybe I'll do like a Star Wars set or something like that, where I'll do like a couple of Star Wars cards, or I'll do a couple of Star Trek cards or something like that. But I also need to figure out like which ones I can actually sort of print and give away as part of a giveaway. Where some of these might say like, hey, you can't like sell this from a commercial point of view. And it's not that I'm selling it, but I don't want to make it look like I'm selling it because you're donating money to the Diversity in Tech fundraiser, which is what the giveaway is about. It's about like, help us raise money for the fundraiser. and then give people something like this in return. I don't want to make it appear like I'm selling it. So this one, for example, can't be used for commercial use. But I'm going to reach out to the people that made this and say, hey, I'm doing this giveaway. It's for diversity in tech. I want to be able to give people a reward for donating to the fundraiser. Can I give them this as a reward? It worked out great for one of the 3D printed dragons. They got back to me right away and they're like, yeah, that's no problem. And so I think authors are okay with it if they actually see like, oh, this is a legit thing. You're not just like turning around and selling our model. Um, so I'm gonna contact all the authors of these kit cards and see if we can get like 2 or 3 like Star Wars or Star Trek or something like that, and just put them all in an envelope. And so you can say, you know, if you get selected as a giveaway recipient or something, you can say I want a Star Wars kit, and I'll put a stamp on it and mail it out to you, that kind of thing. And so I'll probably do something like if you're in the States, we'll mail it out. If you're not in the States, we'll have to figure out like what's shipping going to be, you know, to certain countries. And if it's too expensive, then we'll just do like some sort of PayPal giveaway or something like that, or we'll find some other way of like thanking you for the donation, just so that we can get the fundraiser going. Thanks for the dragon, by the way. You're very welcome. Have trebuchet food fights with those things? Yeah, I mean, it flings stuff pretty good. We've put like, you know, broken up little dog cookies and stuff like that, and like fling them across the kitchen for the dog. Like it'll fling something a good like 8-10 feet. The little printed springs on there are actually pretty robust. Like you could probably fling like a couple of coins at a time, kind of thing. Like it wouldn't fling anything really heavy. Like more than a couple of grams is probably not gonna fling well. But like these little dragons that I printed, like these things will go flying pretty good across the kitchen. But it's fun. Like I want to find something that's gonna be fun, but also flat. It'll be easy to mail, and if it gets a little bit bent, it's not gonna be a big deal, you know, to fit in a mailbox or something like that. So. Mercad93 and Portugal9, good to see you. Thank you for the follows. Appreciate that. I'm always curious how people find the channel. So let us know in chat how you found the channel. Feel free to say hello to us. And yeah, so my name's Ian Douglas. I'm the author of this website, Tech Interview Guide, and I'm just here to help people out with like career prep and interview prep. If you're looking for a job in the tech industry, I've been in the tech industry a long time. I've been a hiring manager and engineering director and things like that. And so I like to share a lot of ideas around how to go get a job. I've got a couple of email newsletters you can go subscribe to if you want to check out the link in chat over here. If you fill out the form on this webpage, it'll send you a link. You click on that link, and then from there you'll get to choose which newsletters you want. And so I can show you what that's going to look like. So when you come in on the website, once you click the link in the email, then you come in here, you say, okay, I want the general newsletter, I want the technical questions newsletter, or I want the behavioral tips. If you uncheck the checkbox, it unsubscribes you. When you hit save down here, it'll unsubscribe you immediately. And if you resubscribe, it starts you back at the beginning. But you can also specify how many days apart you want the message. So if you don't want to get bombarded, you know, you don't want like all 3 newsletters every single day, that's all right. You can space them out and say, I want this one every day, I want this one every 2 days, or once a week, or something like that. And you can also specify what day you want it to start, and it'll email you on that next day. So yeah, so I had a lot of fun building out that system. And there's lots of advice in there. So the technical and the behavioral questions, I talk about like these are the common kinds of questions that you're going to get in interviews, but not how to answer them perfectly. Like I don't necessarily go in like, here's all the technical information and detail that you need to convey in the interview. What I explain is why we ask you those questions. So I don't teach you how to answer it perfectly. I teach you why it's important to us. And then from there, you need to come up with your own answer. The general tips is just kind of like general information about what's the interview process like. I'm still working on some of that content. And then I've got a 4th newsletter that I'm planning, and it's all preparation tips of how do you make a resume, how do you make a cover letter, how do you go research companies and then customize that resume for that company, how do you go apply for that job, how do you handle like the first couple of phone calls, how do you get through the interview, how do you deal with rejection, how do you deal with job offers, how do you deal with multiple job offers, how do you negotiate, and then how do you start the job, and how do you sort of you know, advance through your career from there. So the preparation one's got a lot of content. I've got it all written, but I need to go back and I need to edit it. It's really raw content right now. So I gotta go through and finish that one up. So that one's gonna take a little while, but I'm hoping I can get the preparation one by the end of the year as well. Juggling biohazard says for the puppers, yeah, flinging dog treats across the kitchen is a big hit with our dog, for sure. Built catapults in Lego, that's cool. Wasn't good for the Lego. Yeah, that's for sure. What mentoring topics have been discussed today? Fool, thanks for asking. So when we had Salman on the stream, we were hearing about his background into tech and how he worked on a big open source project and how his interview process really focused on what was that open source project about. Like, it was a Google Summer of Code project. And Google Summer of Code is something that companies can apply to say, hey, we've got this project we want people to come work on, and we'll pay them for their time. So it's kind of like a summer internship, but it's meant to focus on a particular open source project of some kind. And he worked on, this open source project. And he said when he got his first job after university, every interview was really focused on what was that project all about? Tell us what it was like. How did you work on such a big team, working on such a big project? And what he was saying is, like, working on a project with a lot of people where it's a really large code base is very, very much like what it's like going and getting that job in tech. Like, how do you actually handle a really, really large code base where you don't know anything about it? You're thrown into it. You're expected to know where to go find the bug or where to add a feature. And it teaches you about how to communicate with the team and things like that. And how that was a major, major part of his interview process. And so I really liked that he was able to kind of talk through that. And then he worked at that job for a little over a year. And then a friend of his had applied for a job at Microsoft. They made him an offer. He decided not to take the offer from Microsoft, but they said, well, do you know anybody else that would want to apply for the job? And he put in, or his friend put in his name, and Salman got interviewed. And at that point, it was up to him to get through the interview, but he had a friend refer him for the job at that point. And so, this is why networking is such a big deal. And we talk a lot on the stream about networking is probably going to get you a job faster than just applying to tons and tons of jobs. It really comes down to who do you know, who can help you, to refer you to those jobs and things like that. It makes a big, big deal. Yep. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of hearing that background and how he got into tech, and then like how to study data structures and algorithms, and which kinds of data structures and algorithms are probably most important to study for a lot of these kinds of interviews and so on. Fool says, I got my current work by calling a friend. It took 30 minutes to get an interview. Yep, networking will do that for sure. And it's interesting too to kind of see the shift where, in the past it was a lot about, okay, like, I mean, back before the internet was really a thing, if a company had a job, they would like literally put an ad in a newspaper kind of thing and say, we're hiring. You would have to find the ad. You'd have to mail in a resume, like literally put it in postal mail, send them a resume, or figure out how to email it to them or something, and then wait for some kind of response or wait to hear about an interview. Now things are obviously a lot more automated and it's all online, and so it's a much faster process now. But back in the day, it took a while to actually get through the whole process of like, how do you actually get the job? And if you had a referral, it made things much, much faster. Like, someone at the company could just give the hiring manager my phone number, we'd get on a phone call, and it would happen really, really fast. Nowadays, that aspect of it hasn't changed. If I'm working at a company and I know you're looking for a job, I'm going to go mention your name to my manager and see if you're going to be a good fit. And then it's up to you to actually get through the interview. That's going to help the most. I mean, no matter what kind of job it is. And then it's up to you to actually make it through the interview at that point. But networking is absolutely going to help, because back in the day, if I posted a job ad, I might get dozens of resumes. And so I had a fairly short list of, people to actually go through to interview for the job, or to figure out who was qualified for the job. It was a much easier process because we wouldn't get that many people applying for the job. Now, because it's automated, if I put a job post on there, I'm going to get resumes from all around the world saying I want that job. And so it's a lot harder on the interviewer side of things to sort of sift through and filter through and look at all the different people that are trying to apply for the job and try to figure out, like, are these people actually qualified? How qualified are they? What sort of qualifications do they have? And how do we actually get through that many people? And so that's why we have multiple layers of screening, of trying to figure out, like, okay, who's actually got the skill? How do you stand out on that application? And that's where it comes down to, show me projects that are relevant to my company, and you're far more likely to get a phone call. Networking, though, is not guaranteed to get you a phone call, but it's far more likely to get you into the process than just cold applying to jobs. Feisty Kitty says in chat, I got my current job in 2012 after someone I knew from IRC back in the 90s posted something on Facebook about how amazing it was. That's great. I commented saying, that sounds like a place I'd like to work, and he replied with, send me your resume. That's great. Met them in person a week before my start date. That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, like I said, back then it was much easier, but nowadays it can be just as easy. If you know somebody at a company and you say, like, hey, do you have any positions open? A guy that I worked for a number of years ago had, he actually gave a talk from time to time that said, like, 40% or 60%, I think he said 60% of the jobs haven't even been posted yet. Like, your job hasn't even been, like, the job you're going to get hasn't even been posted yet, kind of thing. And the whole idea was, like, you have to network because it's expensive to go through this whole hiring process. And so companies really scrutinize how to write those job posts and so on, or they're thinking about hiring somebody for the role, but they're still trying to figure out, like, okay, well, how do we get the job post ready? How do we build the interview team? What's our interview process going to be like? And so on and so on. Meanwhile, if that manager shares with their team, like, hey, I'm thinking about opening a new role, now people on the team could be like, well, I have a friend. It's like, okay, well, I would rather just interview your friend than go through all of this other process of posting the job and sifting through hundreds of resumes and making tons of phone calls and try to find people that actually want to come interview and go through the whole interview process that takes time and go through, making offers and all that kind of stuff. Like, I would much rather just hire a friend of somebody that's already on my team and get through that process much, much faster. So, and I think a lot of companies think very similarly. If they can save some time by hiring a referral, they're far more likely to do that. And that's why companies have referral programs, because it's expensive to go through the regular sort of process. I'd rather pay someone on my team, $500, $1,000, $2,000, whatever that referral bonus is going to be, to hire somebody you already know, than to spend like $10,000 to $30,000 hiring somebody that nobody knows, because it's expensive to go through that whole process and screening and paying for software licenses for applicant tracking systems and blah, 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 blah. It's expensive. I would rather shortcut that whole process and just hire a referral. So networking is absolutely a big plus. Juggling says, at first I wasn't sure how networking would pan out, but it hasn't been easier to reach out to the recruiter. My issue right now is making more meaningful connections. I think this will change when I have projects to talk about. Having projects to talk about will definitely help, especially if you're targeting a particular industry or targeting a particular company. And then if that company doesn't interview you, they've probably got competition. You can go apply at their competition as well. But knowing what kinds of projects are going to stand out to them and which projects they're going to care about will make a big difference for sure. I think that's a big, I think that's a big draw, is showing that relevance of how are you relevant to my team? Not just that you have the technical skill, but like, why should we hire you specifically? And if you can show that you've got a stronger interest in what we do by building a project about what we do or using the technologies that we have, and say, like, I like your company so much, I built this project with the same technologies that you use to show you that I can come do the job. Those kinds of things will really stand out. But at the same time, I also caution people on the stream too, like, don't feel like you've got to go build, 100 different projects to go get a job. Like that may get you some interviews, but now you're just spending all your time building out all these projects and maintaining all these projects and so on, especially now that Heroku's like not doing free hosting anymore. Like where do you actually put these projects online? Having to go through that whole juggle and dance and stuff again is going to be tricky for a lot of people. It's going to be a little bit trickier to do that, but I would caution, like, don't feel like you have to go build 20 projects or 50 projects. Like, I think you can get away with fewer projects that are larger, that again kind of come down to that idea of like, show me that you understand the fundamentals of what we do. Show me that you know about authentication. Show me that you can handle form input data. Show me that you can store that data and retrieve that data. Show me those fundamentals in one project. You don't have to go build a project just for auth and then go build another project for form data and build another one for database access and build another one for this, another one for that. Just keep building onto one project and just keep adding onto that thing, and then submit that and say, this is a project that show all of the fundamentals that I know how to do. And as you learn new things, go add it onto that project as well, if you can, like if it makes sense to, then go add those things onto that project. And I think showing that on a resume, especially for that first job in tech, I think becomes a little bit easier to demonstrate that you know certain aspects of what we do. So if it's a company that's dealing with like e-commerce and shopping carts and things like that, showing them that you understand about authorization and session management and like storing things in a session and retrieving it later, kind of thing. For, I want to put this in my cart to save it for later. How do you do that? Now you can go apply at any e-commerce company and show them that I understand kind of this workflow. Just logging in, logging out shows a lot of understanding about like, okay, now that you're logged in, who are you? What are you allowed to do? You're kind of getting into the authorization side of things. So you don't necessarily have to go build like 50 different projects. Just go build one project that builds all these fundamentals into one project. And then from there, like I've said on the stream recently too, is you can kind of build all of these other ideas into that application if you want. Like you want to go build a to-do list, or you want to build a recipe tracker or kitchen grocery inventory kind of thing. You can go build that into that application as like kind of a side topic, but you still got all the core fundamentals of a user can log in, they can set up a profile page, and if I go visit Juggling Biohazards profile page, I can see their recipes. And if they visit my profile, they can see my recipes. But if I go visit my profile, I get to add a new recipe or remove an old recipe or something like that. Like show me some of those fundamentals where you can show about authorization and CRUD, create, read, update, delete. Show me that you can build some of that stuff. And I think you can get away with fewer projects that are larger in scope. Feisty says, I got super lucky. I also got in just at the tail end of a company's ability to hire entry level, no experience for software QA. 10 years later, I'm now writing code for automated testing. Awesome. It's great. It's been an amazing experience. I owe it all to spending my time on IRC back in the 90s. That's cool. That's really cool. I got a previous job because I was willing to come in on a Saturday to interview. I mean, having some flexibility is good, but I think companies need to understand about like personal boundaries and like work-life balance and stuff like that too. But at the same time, if you're already working a Monday to Friday kind of job, you're not always available to interview, during the daytime. And so I think asking the company about flexibility like that, like, hey, I really can't leave my job, or, especially for people that are trying to get into the tech industry, if you're working a kind of job where you can't just step away for like an hour or two to do like coding interviews and things like that, then maybe you need to talk to the company. Like, do you have flexible interview times? Because I really can't get away without taking a day off or something like that. Like those are things that you can coordinate with a recruiter and say, hey, I can like plan for like one day off. Can we do a whole bunch of the interviews on that one day? So that I don't have to take like multiple days off or something like that. I think companies are willing to be flexible about that within reason. Like, you can't say, can I do an interview at like 3 a.m? They may not have anybody available that can do an interview that time of day. So, you can ask. The worst they'll say is no. but I think it shows kind of good faith on both sides. If you say, I'm going to do everything I can to attend the interviews, but if you can help me like schedule them, within a certain amount of time, I think a lot of companies and recruiters will do what they can within reason. But, as much as possible, they also want to try to work Monday to Friday as well. But in extreme circumstances, especially for trying to get that first job in tech, if you're in a position where you really can't get away, like Monday to Friday, then you can ask about flexibility for that kind of thing. Fool Snable says, as an old guy, I got my first job by walking into the store, looked the manager straight in his eye, and said, "I'm your man." I mean, my very first job, I was like a busboy at a restaurant, and I walked in and I asked for an application, and I filled out the application, handed it in. They're like, "Yeah, we'll hire you. Like, you have zero experience at all, so we'll teach you how to clear a table," kind of thing. And then my second job was at Wendy's, where they basically train you on everything. They also assume you know nothing. But it's not like that in the software industry. Like the software industry, we expect that you have some amount of skill, some amount of knowledge that you're going to bring to the team, that we don't have to train you on everything. Like we know that there are things that we're going to have to train you on, but we don't want to train you on everything. And that's where the interview process helps us figure out, like, what do you know? What don't you know? What are the limits of your knowledge, and how do we work within those limits to try to figure out how much we need to train you? And then we're going to go back and figure out, okay, do we want this person on the team? Do we have enough people to support them for the things that we know that we're going to have to teach them? Those are all considerations that we make during the interview. Yeah, these are all great questions. Keep them coming. Juggling says, a friend recently walked into a computer store and mentioned he's a software dev. The person working there said, "Great, we need someone with your skills. We're paying minimum wage." Yeah. I mean, at the same time, I've seen software internships pay less than minimum wage. And they're like, if you want the experience, you'll take the job. It's like there are legal boundaries about how much you're supposed to pay, even for like internship roles. Like, never work for free. I tell people all the time, try really, really hard not to volunteer your time. There are people out there, and I kind of consider myself one of them, where we don't consider volunteer work professional experience. If you get paid for it, it's professional experience. If you volunteer, is it professional experience? I think it may vary a little bit, but I'm kind of in the boat of, like, if you're not getting paid for it, it's more project based experience, which is totally okay. Like, I'm going to consider that experience every bit as much as like paid experience, especially for people that are new in the industry. Like, I'm going to look at everything that you've built and everything that you've done and so on, to try to evaluate whether I want you on my team. And so it's not necessarily like, oh, I can't apply for that job because I never got paid for like any of my work. It's like, no, you've still built projects. You still understand what it means to work on a project, with or without a team. Like, even solo projects still count. But if you're volunteering your time, that's fine. But don't let a company take advantage of you by asking you to volunteer your time. Like, if they're a nonprofit organization and they're asking you to volunteer your time, then you can count that volunteer time on your taxes if you're in the United States. And I think in Canada, you can say, I volunteered this many hours, and you can actually get some kind of tax credit back for volunteering your time. Some companies will also, like, they'll not reimburse you, but they'll sometimes pay like a nonprofit organization, like at Postman, for example. They'll match contributions that I make to nonprofit entities, but they'll also match the number of hours by paying for, a certain amount of time, to volunteer my time for organizations as well. But yeah, always get paid, and make sure you're being paid at least minimum wage. Don't ever work for free. If the company can afford to pay you, they should be paying you for your time. Now, on last stream, on Thursday's stream, it was kind of a giant Q&A stream. It was fantastic. We had a bunch of raids and stuff. It was great. We had Strager and Chris Griffin raid in, and so we had like way over 100 people, and chat was flying by with all kinds of questions, but they were really great. And some of the questions that came up were around those topics, where don't Don't volunteer your time. Like, don't give your time away, but like, what kinds of projects should you be working on? How do you get noticed, and so on. And it's really important. Like, don't let companies take advantage of your time. If you don't have the experience, sometimes any experience is better. Yeah, I agree. Like, having some kind of experience, whether it's project experience or actual technical experience, is going to stand out on a resume. A lot of companies, though, they want to see that you've got like professional level experience if they're going to hire you for their role. Like that, that's why they say, oh, it's an entry level role, but we only have 2 years of experience. Well, is it truly entry level if you expect any kind of experience? I would say if it's really meant to be entry level, you should have an expectation of 0 experience and go for, and build on it from there. So yeah. But every company is a little bit different. What I hate seeing, like, I actually saw a post recently. It was like entry level. It was like a product manager role, but still they had flagged it as an entry level role, but they expected 7 years of experience. It's like, that's like senior level role. That's not entry level, and the pay was quite low for what they were expecting, and so on. So be careful to read those job posts and be careful to talk to the company about what their actual expectations are, because there are companies out there that want to take advantage of the fact that you're looking for a job, or especially if you're desperate for a job, like if you're unemployed and you're looking for a job, or if you're just trying to get that first job in tech. Some companies will try to take advantage of that, and they'll try to pay you less than you're worth. So knowing your value, knowing what you're worth, being willing to walk away from a job is a position of privilege, but it's important that you stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself, because nobody else is going to advocate for you except you. And so you have to be able to stand up for the value of your skill and the value of your experience and what you know and what you don't know. And it's okay not to know everything. Like I say that on the stream too. Like, you don't have to go look at these like, oh, you have to know these 25 technologies or you're not actually a developer. Like, no, it's not true. You can go apply for those jobs now. If you can build an app, you can go apply for a job. But you don't have to go like build, on 100 different technologies and build this giant scalable solution or whatever just to go get that entry level job. You don't need to do anything close to that. So I would say, be careful about how you're spending your time. So kind of going back to what Juggling was asking earlier about like what kinds of projects should I be building? If you can build like one project that's showing all of these fundamentals, that's probably enough. Honestly, it's probably enough to get that entry level job. And if you want to get into like QA and things like that, then build really good testing in there. Build lots of unit tests, build integration tests, learn a little bit about Selenium. Like, how can I automate, the browser aspect of testing, like from an end user perspective? Like, you can do those kinds of things too. I think it's important to kind of show that you can do those fundamentals, because that also comes down to another question that I answered on Thursday about like, oh, I got another take-home assignment. Like, how do I avoid doing yet another take-home assignment? It's like, just give them code that you've already done for some other take-home assignment and say, can you evaluate this? Like, this is code that I wrote for somebody else that I'm actively interviewing with. I've done it really recently. Like, is this enough for you to evaluate, or is there something specific that you want me to build to show the skill that you want for this role? And sometimes they'll say like, oh, we just really wanted to see what you could do with authorization. It's like, cool, well, here's another example where I've done some authorization. Is this enough? And, the worst they'll say is, no, we really want you to go build, something with this kind of thing in mind. Well, go build that into an existing project. You don't have to start a whole brand new project every time just to show one little aspect. So if you can kind of build that fundamentals kind of project and you can just keep adding on that, and then you can shop that around. Anytime anybody asks you to do a take-home assignment, offer them that and say, does this cover enough of what you're looking for? Because I built it recently. I'm continually working on it. This shows all the aspects of what I know to do and what I'm capable of. Like, is this enough? And you'd be surprised, how much companies are willing to like take time off of their interview process and say, hey, we're going to speed things up if we just look at this other code already. We don't have to wait a week for you to go do that. Juggling says, very true about knowing your worth. I knew someone that was working in a company. He kept getting promoted with more responsibility but no pay increase. They justified this by saying it looks good on their resume. The person's afraid to leave the job, doesn't want to say so. How would you handle a situation like this, where you also don't want to muddy the waters by saying no, but also fight for what you're worth? Great question. So I recently answered this for someone else, maybe a month or two ago, where they said, hey, I've taken on more responsibility. How do I talk to my boss about it? And I said, start the conversation with your boss by saying, hey, I would like to meet in a month to discuss my compensation because of this new responsibility that I've taken on. And just put it out there and say, I want to have a chat in a month. That gives them time to then figure out finances and whether their budget allow and blah, blah, blah. And then you have a month yourself to prepare. These are all the things I've been involved in. This is the impact that I've had. These are the additional responsibilities I've taken on. I feel that it's worth X additional amount of salary, and at that point you can have that conversation with them. But if you just walk into their office or, hop on a Zoom call and say, hey, these are all the things I've been doing, I want more money, they still have to go through finance and budget and whatever, and it's going to take time. And so if you give them that heads up and say, I want to meet in a month and have that conversation, I'm going to be collecting notes and so on about impact and so on, and I'm going to bring that to the meeting, and I'd like to have a conversation about compensation. So this person on the stream that asked for that advice sent that message to their manager saying, hey, I want to have this conversation in a month. Their manager wrote them back 5 minutes later going, I approved a raise for you. Like, they didn't even need to have the conversation. Sometimes just telling your boss, like, hey, I expect to have this conversation about, taking on this new responsibility, and I want to have this talk. Now, if they're really pushing back and say, well, it looks good on a resume, it's like, I can't pay my rent, I can't pay my bills. They're like, especially with inflation and things like that, if you're not getting a 9% raise, you're already losing money. And so you need to have that conversation, because again, no one else is going to advocate for you but you. You have to stand up for yourself, and you have to say, no, this is my expectation. You've asked me to take on all these additional responsibilities. Here's how I'm handling it. This is the impact that I've had with those other responsibilities. You need to, step up yourself. So Fool's asking 9%. I mean, that's just the cost of inflation. Companies should be giving you additional above just cost of living. If all you're getting is a cost of living increase, then they're not showing you value. Like in the past, the cost of living increase, like inflation in America has typically been like 2 to 3%. And so anything more than 2 or 3% meant the company actually valued your work and they're willing to continue to pay you more. And so I would typically tell people like somewhere in the 5 to 10% range is good, because you're covering inflation, but you're also getting a little bit extra. Some people think like, oh, the only way I'm going to get that 10, 15% raise or 20% raise is to go quit my job and go find another job. Then do that. I mean, yeah, it's going to look great on a resume, but that also sounds like the company's trying to say like, hey, just go put all this stuff on your resume and then leave. I mean, honestly, that's how I would interpret a manager telling me that they don't want to pay me, but they want me to put the stuff on my resume. It's like, all right, you want me to leave? I will go find another job. Then they shouldn't be surprised. If you tell them you want a raise and they say no, they shouldn't be surprised that you leave. So I would encourage your friend, go update their resume. Put all that stuff on their resume. Go find another job, get another job offer, and walk back into their boss's office and say, hey, that raise you didn't want to give me, this company's going to offer me 15%, 20%, 25% more because of these extra responsibilities. You should have been paying me this all along. Otherwise, like, clearly my skill is worth X dollars that you chose not to pay me, so I'm out. And they can't argue with that. But if you start with the conversation and say, I want to have a talk about my compensation, and if they don't make a move, if they don't want to give you that raise, then they shouldn't be surprised that you leave to go get that raise. You've taken on additional responsibility. You've grown in your skill. You're able to prove that. You're able to show that impact. Go make the money. I mean, that's like, you got to do what's right for you. You got to do what's best for you and your background and your family and your interests and your retirement plans, like all that. You have to advocate for yourself. Nobody else is going to do it. I can't call your boss and say, so-and-so needs a raise. They're not going to listen to me. Who am I? Right? You have to advocate for yourself. You have to know the value of your skill, and you need to be able to go and talk to your boss and say, this is my expectation. This is what I want to be making. This is what my skills are worth on the market. And this is what, this is my expectation. Start with the conversation saying, I want to meet in a month to talk about my compensation. And then you have a month to start documenting all that stuff yourself and go through every project, every little thing that they've asked you to take on. Document all of that stuff. Walk in, put it on their desk or send it virtually or whatever. Send the email and say, this is the impact that I've had. Based on some market research that I've done, I should be making X dollars. What can you do? And at that point, then hopefully they've spent that month looking into finance and also doing similar checks of what have you been doing? What's the impact? What is that value to the company? So that they can say, we're willing to offer you this much money. You can say, well, based on the market, I want this much money. Now you can have that negotiation with them. And if they say, oh, we can't pay you that, say, okay, I'll take the raise that you can give me. What can we do to get to this other amount in the short term? Because I've taken on this responsibility and this is what it's worth on the market. And if they say we really can't make that raise, say, okay, I'll take the raise that you're going to give me. And then end the meeting. Like just say, thank you, I'll take that raise. Go look for another job. Because your company's not willing to pay for it, some other company will. And if you've done your homework on what those skills are actually worth, then they shouldn't be surprised if you walk in later and say, hey, that raise that you didn't give me, this other company's going to give me. So here's my notice. They shouldn't be surprised that you're going to leave at that point because they couldn't match market rate for what your skills are worth. And no, fool, your comment's not that off topic. I mean, this is what it comes down. Like, this is part of what I talk about too. Is how do you negotiate for these kinds of things? You need to have this conversation. You need to know the value, so that you can sit down and you don't want to walk into this meeting and just say I deserve 10% more. You have to explain why. You have to show the impact that you had, and you need to talk to them about why you deserve that money, not just that you deserve money. You shouldn't go in and just demand it and say, you need to pay me 10% more. Or even just say hey, because of inflation, I need to get at least 9% more, or you're not even keeping up with inflation. You need to go in and say, this is the impact I've had. These are the projects. These are the things I've built. This is the impact that I've had. This is the value that I'm continuing to bring to the company. That's what's going to stand out to them. And if you can do that, if you can show them that value, they can't argue with it. Because you're taking the time to actually sit down and talk about it and actually prove to them the value that you're bringing. They can't argue to that. Cool. Well, we've been going for about 90 minutes. This is typically how long I stream for. So we'll start to wrap up. But if you got last questions or whatever, absolutely happy to take questions. I don't have to cut off right at the 90-minute mark. If you've got other questions, other topics you want me to get into, I'm absolutely happy to take on other questions and so on. Otherwise, I got some stuff I need to get done today. Let's see. Finite is on right now. I think we'll go stream over to Finite. Hoping to get Finite on the stream on the 15th. This Thursday, I think we have a guest on the stream this Thursday. Let me go find out. This Thursday, Oliver Ponder. So Oliver is a startup founder, and we're going to have a chat about what it's like to be in the tech industry as a founder and what stands out to startup companies. What's important to them? How do you stand out to a startup company? What kind of employee makes a good employee at a startup? It may not be as friendly for entry-level developers, but some startups are very friendly about hiring entry-level devs. But again, it comes down to the value you bring and whether they value your skills. Some startups will only hire people because they can pay you a little bit less, and that's important for startups. Startups also like to pay in equity, and so understanding what equity is and whether that's even beneficial to you at this stage in your career is important to know. But we're going to have that whole conversation on Thursday. So that'll be Thursday with Oliver. I'll confirm with Oliver today or tomorrow that they're actually going to be on the stream, but that'll be Thursday. And we also had a guest lined up, Rohit, who is a technical writer and does training and so on. That was supposed to be on the stream a couple of weeks ago, and their laptop broke. So if there's ever a point where somebody can't be on a stream, Rohit's like, I'll come in last minute and join the stream. So if the schedule's a little off and suddenly Rohit shows up, that's why. But yeah, otherwise, I have, sorry, point this way for chat. I moved chat over to this side. I have had a recurring thing pop up that if you're in tech, if you help people with interview preparation, or if you're in programming, if you've been doing this for a while, or if you're new to the industry and you're working your way through like that first job, or you ever want to be on the stream and talk about your journey, I would love to have you on the stream. So reach out and let me know. You can DM me on all the platforms. You can find me on the socials. Otherwise, I've got all the links ready to go that we've been sharing today over here in chat. The reason I'm still pointing over this way is because in my OBS, chat is over here, but I also see it on my screen over here because I moved things around a little bit. But I'll get all those links in the descriptions, and I may clip some of the stuff a little bit later. I've got a whole bunch of clip work that I need to go through the last couple of streams, especially the last one. We had a lot of Q&A. I think we had like 10 questions get answered on the last stream. It was 3 hours long and really, really good questions. Appreciate everybody coming through, asking questions all the time. I love helping people out. So we're going to go right over to Finite. Again, I'm hoping to get Finite on the stream on the 15th. It's tentative right now, but we'll go right over to Mark's channel, and we'll see everybody over there. Make lots of noise in his chat. He has really cool like overlays and stuff like that. So go abuse your channel points if you're over there. We can turn him purple and have his dog come code and all that kind of stuff. So we'll catch you all on Thursday. Have a great day. If your day is over where you are, hope that you had a great day. If you're watching on YouTube later, again, please like and subscribe and leave some feedback for us in the YouTube comments and let us know what you think. And we'll catch you all next time. Cheers.